I'm going to give you all of the information you need to survive Game Week 23 and beyond in FPL. Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and today we're going to be taking a run through of all of the key players and discussion points as we head into Game Week 23 and the double and blank Game Week season on the horizon in FPL. One of the first and key players to talk about right now is obviously going to be Kevin De Bruyne. And again, he's going to be really popular ahead of Game Week 23. Now, there were concerns about his minutes or whether or not he'd start against Burnley, but obviously he did start. He got around 70 minutes, got the assist and got a bonus point as well. So that is 2 matches in a row where he's returned pretty well for anyone who jumped on him early. 1.7 million transfers in Game Week 22 is a season record and one of the most popular transfers in of all time in any one given game week. So a lot of managers did jump on him and a lot captained him as well. So congratulations if you were one of those. But for those of us who don't already have him at this point, Kevin De Bruyne is going to be very tempting to bring in ahead of Game Week 23 and ahead of a really good set of fixtures, including the double game week in 25 with 2 home games. Now, very quickly on this, again, we're going to be concerned about his minutes moving forward, but because he was taken off early last night against Burnley, I think he's probably in line for another start against Brentford, and it will probably be a running theme where he gets taken off just after the 60-minute mark to start with, just so that they can manage his minutes a little bit. There might be the odd rest in there. And full disclosure, I would be slightly concerned about Game Week 25 in isolation. 2 games back-to-back in quick succession, even though they're both at home, is going to be quite a lot for him after coming back from quite a long layoff. But I think you could probably say that about a lot of Man City assets. They've got a lot of quality in their team, and there aren't many players in that 11 that I'd expect to start both matches. So even if you don't think he plays 180 minutes in that Game Week 25 double, if he can get 110 to 120 minutes, that's probably not too bad in 2 home fixtures against sides that you'd expect City to do pretty well against. The underlying data is still great. The ownership's rising really quickly, and barring saving money for Mo Salah, who is still a massive question mark for that Game Week 25, there's not really a lot else you want to do with that money at the moment. So Kevin De Bruyne does make a lot of sense if you're in a position to go there. So we're going to run through a number of Man City players first and foremost. And the second one, obviously, I'm going to want to talk about is Erling Haaland. He got a price rise without even playing a minute in the Premier League since injury. And obviously came off the bench for about 20 minutes last night. No return, but he did look like he was in and around the action. So he's quite unlucky not to get something in even those 20 minutes. Now, I was very tempted to go there even without knowing that he was going to start, but given the leak pre-deadline, I did back off and I considered making that move in Game Week 23 instead. Now, because he's been given minutes off the bench, you'd think that he's building towards a start in Game Week 23. Whether or not that match comes slightly too soon for him is up for debate, though. So there's a chance that yet again he'll come off the bench for one more game in Game Week 23 and maybe get half an hour with Alvarez subbing off for him, for instance. Now, that could go either way at this point, but I think it's fair to say that Erling Haaland is going to be on a lot of people's radars going into Game Week 23, and importantly, ahead of Game Week 25, where a lot of managers are going to be looking at using the triple captain on probably either him, De Bruyne, or if he's back, Mo Salah, if they get the double. More on that later. But obviously the underlying data is fantastic. When he's starting games, you're going to want him in your team, so make sure you've got a plan to get to him. But I wouldn't say that you absolutely need to move heaven and earth to get to him this week, based on the idea that without any news from Pep, we're not going to know whether he starts or not. So if we get heads up that he is starting the Brentford game, definitely have a plan to get back to him. But if not, then I think if you want to back against him, it's okay probably for one more week. So a key reason that Erling Haaland probably hasn't been rushed back into the fore so far is Julian Alvarez, who has looked really good up front for City recently. 2 goals at home against Burnley last night on his birthday, and he is going to be hotly contesting a starting 11 place for the foreseeable. It is worth noting that even when Erling Haaland was fit, they were both regularly starting together anyway. But I think Kevin De Bruyne being back as well just means that there are a lot of players contesting that front 6 for Man City. And Alvarez is probably going to have his minutes managed a little bit at times. Now, that's not to say he's not a good option, because at under 7 million, he is obviously going to be an incredible option if he's getting minutes for Man City. But because Kevin De Bruyne is back as well as Erling Haaland, I think it's fair to assume that we might see a few early subs like we did yesterday, although it wasn't too early, let's be honest. And it was plenty of time for him to still get returns. But again, because there are so many quality players there, I would be slightly nervous that every now and then he might get the odd rest, he might get the odd early sub. And that's, again, not to say he's not a good option, because he definitely is. If you've got him, I would absolutely not be selling him ahead of this run of fixtures and game week 25, because he'll get good minutes in that double as well. But I think if you've not bought him yet, then I think there's an argument to say that maybe you could just leave him for the time being. I don't think he's an essential buy moving into the next few fixtures when you look at the other City options that are currently on the table that might be more explosive over the next few weeks. So rounding off the Man City assets really quickly, and Kyle Walker was a player that is on a lot of people's radars even now, but that was basically based on the fact that he was starting week in, week out in that Man City defence. Now, obviously, he got his first rest of the season for spurious reasons, let's say. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes with this one. But because he's been given that one rest, I think that's enough to put me off going full steam ahead on bringing in Kyle Walker for the time being. I think it's still very likely that he regains his starting place and he will be a regular starter for City by the time we get to game week 25, when we're all going to really want that coverage. However, for the time being, I don't think there's a massive rush to go there, and we've got the next 2 game weeks to probably just see whether or not he regains his starting place and the issues are sort of put to a side for Kyle Walker. So moving on to Liverpool assets now, and one huge thing I wanted to flag at the start of this section is the fact that, as you can see on the ticker, game week 26 is a blank for them, but that fixture that was originally in game week 26 against Luton hasn't yet been reorganised for game week 25, when we're all expecting them to double. Now, that is a little bit of a cause for concern, because game week 25 is now getting closer and closer, and you'd think that if the fixture schedulers were thinking straight, they would put it in there as quickly as possible to give fans a heads up so that they can get their tickets for the game and make travel arrangements for it, for example. Now, because that hasn't been organised yet, because it's getting later and later in the day, I think if we get to Friday or Saturday morning and that still hasn't been scheduled in for game week 25, I would be quite worried that it's just not going to be. For what it's worth, it really should be, because there's not many other opportunities for Liverpool fixtures to be rearranged into later on in the season, as I explained in my chip strategy video last week. So do go and check that out if you want a detailed explanation as to why that fixture really ought to go into game week 25. Moving past that and just hoping that Liverpool do get that double confirmed in the next couple of days, Diogo Jota is going to be really popular and yet again scored last night. Now, the underlying data is good enough that for 8 million, he's going to be incredible value for money. He's looking like he's in the form of his life since coming back from injury. And again, he's actually fairly differential. That ownership is increasing week in, week out, but it's still only just a smidge over 10%, which is actually quite surprising considering how potent he's been in front of goal recently. For someone who's been out for pretty much half the season, to get 13 attacking returns is kind of ridiculous. And if they do get that double in game week 25, I think that ownership is going to skyrocket, especially if we don't get any news on Mo Salah. Now, I think for the time being, he's still a very good purchase. Burnley in 24 is obviously going to be a key fixture there, but he's also got a good record against Arsenal in 23. So I wouldn't put anyone off going early and bringing him in for 23, especially because the earlier you get to him, the more matches you're going to have of him before Mo Salah gets back. Now, all of us are going to have one eye on Mo Salah's fitness. There is a chance that he's going to be back by game week 25, but given the type of injury it is, I would still say he's going to be nursed back into the side, and Jota's minutes are still going to be likely pretty good as we head into the potential double game week. it is important to note, have a plan for what you're going to do with all of these Liverpool assets in game week 26 when they do blank. But as long as you've got that plan set in stone, bringing in someone like Diogo Jota really looks like a very good choice at the moment. There isn't a week that goes by that Darwin Núñez isn't making headlines at the moment. And yet again, it was one of the most typical Darwin Núñez performances I've ever seen. For what it's worth, at least he was on the penalties, which is something to note down for future. But because he missed, he could easily be taken off of them for the future. Now, he had scored 12 of 12 penalties in his career so far leading up to that moment. So he's still got a very good record from penalties. But for him to miss a penalty, get a yellow card, and then get an assist to take him back up to 2 points for the night is classic Darwin Núñez. His underlying data is still absolutely ridiculous. In fact, I think over the season, if we're looking at players that play regularly, I think he's only really second to Mo Salah in Liverpool and third overall against Erling Haaland as well. So he is, in terms of data, one of the most explosive assets out there. But because he misses so many chances, he's hit the woodwork a record amount of times already this season and hit it 4 times last night as well, which again is a Premier League record. This guy is not great on the bonus points. You know that you're in for a bit of a bumpy ride if you've got him in your side. So I understand why people wouldn't want to go there. I've got him in my side at the moment and I'm seriously considering just binning him off because it's just not worth the hassle. But knowing how explosive he can be and the fact that that double game week could be put in game week 25, I think if you've got him, you probably hold him for now. And anyone who doesn't have him, I think you can just sit back, relax for a couple of game weeks, and then maybe look at bringing him in game week 24 or 25 if they get the double confirmed. For the time being, though, just enjoy the ride because it's going to be a bumpy one for the next couple of weeks, that's for sure. So finally, on Liverpool assets, another player that's really been taking his opportunity recently with Trent being injured is Connor Bradley. Now, he has been absolutely ridiculous recently. And at 4 million, if he started regularly, that is an absolute steal. The underlying data is over 0.5 XGI per 90 at the moment. It is a very limited sample size, so take that with a massive pinch of salt. But he is getting forward down that right wing and is very effective from that position, so it seems. It seems like they might have uncovered another Trent version 2 in their side. Now, that's not to say that I think he's a good or a bad FPL option at this point. I think we've got to get more data to see whether or not that he's going to get the minutes now that Trent is back. A lot of people online last night were suggesting that perhaps he's been so good that he's going to earn his starting place and Trent is going to be moved into midfield. But I think especially with that Arsenal game first up, Klopp is probably going to revert back to what he knows, and Trent is most likely to go back to right back now he's gotten a few minutes under his belt. Now, one thing to note, with Trent in mind in particular, is because Bradley has been really good recently, Trent now has someone that could take minutes off of him to give him a bit of a rest every now and then. So in a congested fixture period, we might see Trent getting taken off early. We might see him getting rested every now and then if we feel like he's been overused in recent weeks. With game week 25 in mind, that is cause for concern with the double game week that Trent could be rested in one or rotated in one or get taken off early because Connor Bradley is quite obviously an able deputy. So that is one thing to note on this Bradley versus Trent scenario, that even though I don't think Trent's going to lose his starting place, he might get his minutes managed just that little bit and making him ever so slightly a less effective FPL asset. For the time being, though, I think probably not worth diving in on Connor Bradley for now, especially with Arsenal away first up. But if he continues to get good minutes, then at 4 million, he could be a steal and a bit of a game breaker. So definitely one to keep an eye out for the time being. So it's time to talk about 2 different Tottenham assets, both midfielders in the game, but namely Richarlison being an out-of-position striker in FPL. So at 7 million, Richarlison is obviously going to be very interesting to a lot of managers for the next few game weeks. But as you can see on the ticker, they don't have the advantage of a double game week in 25, and they will blank in game week 26. A little bit further on the horizon, Tottenham assets will be playing in game week 29, which will be quite a large blank. So if you can navigate game week 26 with Spurs assets perhaps on the bench or maybe with a free hit, then they're good assets to hold for the next 8 or 9 game weeks, because game week 29, you're going to want them. The fixtures, if we disregard game week 26, are also really, really good. So Everton, Brighton, Wolves, and then Palace in game week 27 is a great run. And then in 29, when everyone else is blanking, they'll have Fulham as well, which is, again, a really decent fixture. Richarlison now has 7 goals in 7 games. He's playing phenomenally well in that number 9 role for Spurs. And with James Maddison back, chances are going to keep flowing for him. The underlying data, especially that XG per 90 at 0.57, is absolutely ridiculous for someone who's registered as a midfielder, especially because they get 5 points per goal as well. I think next season he'll be up front in FPL, he'll be a striker and obviously getting 4 points for a goal. But whilst he's registered as a midfielder, you kind of take that extra point and run. The other player that I wanted to talk about really quickly, all in one big section, is James Maddison. Now, he's a little bit more expensive. He's a little bit lower owned, but the underlying data is arguably just as good, or definitely in the same sort of sphere as Richarlison's. Out of the two players, I think I slightly prefer Richarlison at the moment if you were going to buy one right now. The reason for that is because they're both registered as midfielders, but Richarlison's much more heavily weighted towards goals than assists. And Maddison, having come back from quite a long layoff, I think his minutes will be managed a little bit for the next few game weeks. Now, again, the fixtures are great, so I'd have no problem with a manager that wanted to bring in both. But if you did, I would still be looking at game week 26 and wondering whether or not you would need a free hit to get out of it, because having all of that Spurs exposure, especially because a lot of managers are probably going to be piling in on Liverpool assets the week previous, and they blank in game week 26 as well, might leave you in a little bit of a tough spot when we hit that first blank game week in 26. So do have that in the back of your mind. But in isolation, if we disregard Richarlison, Maddison is also a very good pick. I would just say that out of the two of them, at the moment, I'd probably just about favour Richarlison for price and attacking upside. So we've talked about one midfield duo. Now let's take a quick look at another, and it's worth talking very quickly about the Crystal Palace midfielders of Eze and Michael Olise. Both are very differential at the moment, with good reason, because they've both got their injury doubts. But when they're in the side, they are both proving to be explosive options that have significant attacking upside. As you can see, both of which are going along at a rate of far beyond 0.5 XGI per 90. So if I switch between the two, Eze is about 0.6 overall, and Olise is all the way up at above 0.7 XGI per 90. Both are under 5% owned. Again, there's good reason for that, because they've been injured for a long time over the season, and there are trust issues there for FPL managers because they could easily get injured again. But if you wanted to take that chance, they are incredibly cheap. Eze at just 6 million, Michael Olise at 5.9, both very, very good options for the next few game weeks, especially with Brighton first up, who have just conceded 4 away at Luton. Now, again, they won't have a double, but they do have a fixture in game week 26 when a lot of sides are blanking. That being Burnley at home as well is obviously a very good fixture, a very tempting one to be piling in on Crystal Palace assets. For what it's worth, I would probably give them a couple of weeks yet and look at maybe jumping on them in game week 26 when they've got that prime fixture. But if you wanted to take a chance early, then Eze and Olise, if they are proven to be fit to start this week, because both are technically flagged on the FPL website at the moment as doubts. Again, for what it's worth, Eze did come out after the game and say that both of them were actually fine and it was just precautionary. So fingers crossed that that's going to not be a problem. But because we have been burnt in the past by their injury doubts, I think personally it's worth waiting a week or two until we get to the really good fixture in game week 26 in particular, and then we can look at jumping on differentials in Olise and Eze. So a quick word on Ivan Toney, and he's now scored in back-to-back games since his return from that long layoff due to the ban. Now, in last night's game in particular, he got a goal and an assist, so that's 3 attacking returns in just 2 matches since he returned. And again, with that double game week in 25, he's going to be on a lot of people's radars for the next few weeks. It is worth noting that the fixtures in terms of difficulty are looking not so nice right now, especially in game week 23. Man City at home, not fantastic. But for a player as talismanic as Ivan Toney, who also does seem to raise his game against more difficult opposition, like I mentioned last week, he scored half of his goals last season against top 8 opposition. So we know he can do it in the big matches. None of these fixtures would particularly put me off. Man City, yes, they're a good defence, but they do seem to find ways of conceding in most matches at the moment. Wolves, I wouldn't be worried about. That double game week, just the fact it's a double is probably enough to make him a good option then. And then importantly, they don't blank in either game week 26 or game week 29, and he could even be a really good captaincy candidate in game week 29 as well. So if you want to navigate the next few game weeks without needing to use a chip, then Ivan Toney could be a really prudent move for the next couple of game weeks, because it helps you navigate them without blanks and with that extra double in game week 25. So a quick word on Cole Palmer before we wrap up this episode, and he is a player that did disappoint against Liverpool last night, but overall his underlying attacking data is still looking really good. I don't think he's going to be a sell, especially for the next 2 game weeks against Wolves and Crystal Palace. I think you hold on to him if you've got him for those 2 weeks. However, there is now an argument that you could get rid of him in game week 25. A lot of us bought him when he was 4.9 or 5 million, so have a lot of value tied up in him. So there will be resistance to selling him, and I completely understand that because I'm also in that position. But given the fact that Spurs assets are doing really well, we're going to want a lot of Liverpool players as well, then having Chelsea players also as we head into game week 26 is going to be quite difficult to make that game week something that we can navigate with free transfers. Cole Palmer could be one player that may be on the chopping block in game week 25, especially because it's Man City away from home in that game week. Yes, he's on penalties. Yes, it's against his old club, so he's going to be highly charged up and wanting to do something in that game. So it is going to be a difficult sell. But if by that point we know that Chelsea also blank in game week 29, if they progress against Villa in the Cup, or at least have a very good chance of blanking in game week 29, then it will be 2 blanks in 4 game weeks and Man City in game week 25 as well. So I think it makes him a player that could be sacrificed, although for the next couple of game weeks, there's no way that I'm getting rid of him until we get to that point and we know more information. So that just about wraps up everything you need to know ahead of game week 23 and the upcoming doubles and blanks on the horizon. In the meantime, if you did have any questions or players that I haven't talked about today that you'd like to discuss, do leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. As always, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. And obviously you wouldn't miss out on any future content. And I'll see you tomorrow as we start looking at my team selection ahead of game week 23.